I mentioned, I've been doing UX design for a really long time. My name is Jeremy Johnson. I'm Vice President of Customer Experience for Project 202. You can learn more at project202.com. We're a 3-minute drive this way, on the corner of Beltline and Tollway. And you know, we spend a lot of time driving digital transformations, right? I think all of us are probably in that business right now, right? You have companies moving from walkie-talkies and fax machines to the digital world, or connecting to digital tools. We do quite a bit of that. We've been around for 14 years. We've been here in Dallas for about 6 or 7 of those years. We have some great clients like Mercedes-Benz, and Capital One, Samsung, Container Store, Neiman Marcus, so lots of great companies. And we do projects across the board, so we do all custom work. So the 3 years that I've been there, I've been on projects around the car UI, I've been on projects around flight operations centers, I've been on e-commerce projects. So it's whenever there's a custom project, that's the type of work that we're usually doing across any number of industries. But everything we do starts with customer needs, so customer-centric software development. And what you see here, these are photos that we've taken when we've gone out in the field. So this photo here was actually taken from a project around making tools for farmers. So our researchers, our UX designers actually went out to a number of farms to understand their world, understand how they're using technology, and understand how technology can actually improve what they're working on. These two are workplace. We've done work for accountants and lawyers, and we've done operations software. So many types of workplaces across the board. This is in-home, so we go in-home as well quite often. I think this was for a home loan project. But it's around really understanding what customers, end users, and employees want out of your products before building, right? So a lot of companies today really just start building things on day one, and we take a more customer-centric view, and that's actually, we build out where a lot of those requirements, a lot of those insights come from. And so again, you know, we're making customer experience journey maps. We have a validation usability lab, so we can actually run design prototypes early and often through with actual customers. So imagine, you know, if you're a consumer application, or even if you're not, you know, we did one with HR professionals. So there's panel companies. I can get HR professionals to show up in our validation lab. We can have them use a piece of software that's built on with design tool set, and quickly understand if it's working well or not, and make those changes now before it gets to the development team. So it's just a bit of a snapshot. I've also been in-house as well. I worked in-house for Sabre for a number of years, running their user experience group for Travel Network, which was a travel agent side of the business. GameStop, I helped when they were kind of going through a digital transformation program a couple years back. I ran design user experience, and then Travelocity up into the Expedia acquisition. I worked for Travelocity as well. And actually, when I was at Travelocity, I was able to meet Marty Kagan. So our CEO knew him and brought him in to Travelocity. We were going through a product transformation. So we had a lot of project managers, but we're really moving to product ownership model, which is new for a lot of people. And I really fell in love with basically everything he says. But this book is great, Inspired How to Create Products Customers Love. And as a UX designer, what I like about it is he really talks about how to utilize UX design, user experience design, rapid iterative prototyping, right? He talks about how to use those in the product method. And he's probably you can describe him as a product owner potentially, but he has an engineering background as well, which makes him really interesting. If you want to chat with me on Twitter, I'm at Jeremy Johnson. On SlideShare, I post all my decks, and I'll post this one as well here in a day or two on slideshare.com/Jeremy, and I have a website at Jeremy Johnson online as well. I have lots of different presentations. I have UX 101. I have Understanding Customer Needs. I thought this one would be interesting because I know a lot of companies in the area are really ramping up UX teams. So I know this might be new, or at least you're now going to have a UX team if you hadn't had one before. So I thought this might be appropriate. Because really, software development has changed. I guess how many people are still using waterfall methods in their organization? 0? That's surprising. We bump into a lot of companies that are still using waterfall, or like last week they just changed to Agile. So that's good that you're all moving in the right direction. So obviously, but it's not just from waterfall to Agile, right? There's actually something else that's coming around. So Bill Scott is VP of Engineering at PayPal. He has kind of a product owner engineering background, and he has he's talked at conferences about Agile doesn't have a brain. Well, Agile is a great mechanism for releasing iterative software. It's great for noticing market conditions and making changes. There's no real mechanism to decide if a customer will find value or a customer wants to use the thing that you're building. And so this is kind of a discussion that's going on around UX designers and product owners. But design and design thinking and human-centered design processes, these are on the front covers of magazines like Bloomberg and Harvard Business Review. And companies, Gartner says 89% of companies believe that customer experience will be their primary basis for competition by 2016. So companies are understanding customer experience, user experience, the experience across your product is key and very important, not only on the consumer side, but on the workplace side as well, especially with a lot of millennials coming into the workforce. We've also found that design adds business value. So when you talk about what can design do for you, well, it could add more revenue. I have a whole nother talk called UX equals ROI, where I go over a number of case studies and stories around making sometimes very, very small changes equal millions of dollars to the bottom line, and revenue increases based on usability. Reduce costs, so you're able to connect systems together, you're able to improve systems, you're reducing the cost from what your employee tool set. We've worked with a number of companies, and after launching better call center tools or better flight operation tools, they've seen huge increases in performance, which really cascades up to the customer in a lot of those situations where it's improving the customer experience holistically. Time to market. If you can validate with a design prototype earlier, and you can make sure the requirements are the right requirements before you give them to the development team, you can get there faster. And innovation, right? Going out and observing people, sitting and walking a mile in their shoes. Most of the time, we're not the jobs that we're building tools for. Not always. Sometimes that is the case, but most often not. And so you really have to understand what's going on in their world. What tools are they using? What tools aren't they using? If I had a dime for every time we go out to a company, for a client, it's a B2B application where they're like, I don't know why they're not using our application. We have a whole suite of tools. It does everything they would ever need. And you go out there and they're using a competitor tool. They're using sticky notes on a whiteboard. They're using paper, right? Like there's all these other things they're doing that data just can't capture unless you go out and observe and understand what they're doing. And it solves many common challenges that I would assume many of you might have, right? Like you want the right backlog prioritized, right? Every feature you add in there adds tech debt and feature debt. And how do you prioritize that backlog? So understanding customer needs through design thinking methodology, right? You could bring that and make sure the backlog is prioritized specifically to customers and employees of what they need and what they want. Improving the overall customer experience, having a consistent innovation pipeline, understanding what your customer wants out of your brand next. And validated value, right? So we can actually go validate things again before you get heavy into the development process. A lot of development processes really kind of start here with sprint development. You have a backlog. Maybe the backlog came from a brainstorming exercise. Maybe it's a replatforming, so it's just the same features you had before, just so that are going into the new system. But there's actually this whole new world of ways of really understanding and bringing in data basically into that pipeline. So there's a dual track scrum, which is kind of getting some popularity right now, where you have insights and ideas, and as from a UX designer, are you going out and observing people and pulling those insights would be a key there. But wherever you're gathering your information from surveys or customer councils, we could design and prototype very quickly any number of solutions and validate them. Marty Kagan talks about how you should have a validation backlog, and if every idea makes it from the validation backlog to the development backlog, you're not validating. You're not validating well, because not everything should make it. Not every idea is a good idea. Something should be killed, right? And so there's this whole other world that a lot of organizations really aren't. It's available to them. They're not currently using it. So. Understanding the what and why around your customer's behavior is one of the top things you need to do to be successful, and I think there's a growing body of evidence that really supports that. It's building empathy, right? That's kind of another buzz term. So it's again going out and observing. When we build out personas or customer experience journey maps, one, we try to bring the business along that entire journey, but two, we're bringing those deliverables to the team. So even if you have an offshore team, they may have I had a friend who said they're doing a project and it was for an application here in the States, and they had offshoring in China, and it was around camping, and folks in China didn't understand why you would go out in a forest in a thin sheet and spend the night. And so it's bringing empathy of what customers need. That's a basic one, but there's more complex ones as well to the entire team, so everyone kind of has a view of their users. And so when we go out, it's again in people's homes and in workplaces, and this is just another photo of our validation lab here, where the business team can be back here, and you can actually watch people use your products. There's a number of people, I'd say, the more often your team is actually watching people use the products you're making, the better that product's going to be. We've done some car UI projects, and so where are you going to test car UI? In a car, right? And so what's funny is it's very low tech. This is InVision, which is a common prototyping tool set for UX designers. This is a Samsung tablet, Velcro to the dash. We rented a silver car, and so we're validating car UI, and this was a test where you go through a series of 5 or 6 people a day. You have a day off, the designers make their tweaks, 5 or 6 more people, you continue to make those tweaks, and you have a better product at the end of that process. and a more validated backlog of what you should be building. I mentioned flight operations software. Many times we go in workplaces, again, things going on with paper and walkie-talkies and things that should be moved to digital for a number of reasons, car dealerships. But really it's about bringing customer and user insights and pulling them throughout that whole process. The way we kind of bucket up the process is revealing realities, where we really do the generative research to really kind of understand what those user needs are, what those insights are, what those pain points are, what things we should be solving for. And you can kind of see kind of watermarked here in the background. Really, it's a variance, right? And so, if you have a 2-year project, which I see this quite often as well, 2-year replatforming project, they're never going to show it to anyone who's actually going to use it the whole entire time. That still happens today, and there's so many ways to, one, understand exactly what they're looking for, validate that you're heading in the right direction, right? And then you get into agile development, and you're iterating and launching, and you're still learning the whole entire time. But that variance for error, it's risk mitigation, right? And so what does a UX designer do? So in the past, I would say we were probably described as the people who knew Photoshop. It's the person that knows Photoshop. They were the person that potentially made things look good. Maybe they could code CSS. When I was at Travelocity, when I was at Sabre, I knew people from Travelocity at that time, and the designers would visually design the page. They would code it in CSS because the developers were Java devs and they didn't know CSS at the time. It's front-end development's kind of coming to its own. And then they would give the CSS mocks to the development team. The development team would pull it up in the web browser, put it on their monitor, and then recode it from scratch. Right? These are the processes that we're sure we've all seen. Make it look like your brand. That's the person that makes it look like our brand, right? Or that follows the brand guidelines. So what it's really moving to today, designers, it's kind of growing. Maybe their job's kind of growing on what they do. So it's around, they really understand a deep design methodology, and it is a repeatable methodology, just like Agile or anything else. They're trained in understanding customer needs. They lead teams in building empathy, and they can help shape product strategy because they have those insights from employees and from consumers. And this is called the Center. It's a kind of well-known user experience school. I think it's in South Carolina. But if you look at the different programs, and these were programs that I did not have access to when I was going to school, so user research practices, copywriting and content strategy, design process management, ethnographic research methods, right? One of our lead researchers has an anthropology background, and she's usually out in the field. Again, it's an exciting world of accountants or whatever, but she's out there with them, right? Understanding their role and bringing that information back. But this is what modern UX programs look like, and it is taking time. I would say in Dallas, probably UTD has the best program, with SMU kind of coming up quickly behind them. A lot of schools are still not teaching a lot of these types of methods that are really important for user experience designers. And so, we're not trying to take your jobs. That's another thing I know. Sometimes I'm up with the program managers, and I know you guys, I feel like, what I've heard, are being also coached to make sure you understand the customer, which is absolutely true. You should absolutely know the customer, but I find a lot of times product owners don't have access to UX teams. There's no access to people that can help them facilitate that and drive that because you guys are busy. You guys have so much stuff going on. Like, I don't want your job, right? Like, you're daily, telling business why you should exist. You're getting budget. You got paying customers you have to deal with, right? There's lots of other stuff that UX designers do not want to deal with. And I've known some UX designers that have gone into product ownership. Sometimes it works because they're very passionate about creating great products. Sometimes it doesn't work because they can't get out of the weeds of design, right? And up to what's really going on with product owners. And I know this is a kind of, I know what product managers do because I sit with them, but because you do so many things, a lot of people don't understand what product managers do because there's so many different ways of describing it, and depending on where you work, you're doing different things, right? So I know everyone wants to be Steve Jobs here. But how is product in UX? What is that like? Is it like a president and vice president kind of connection, right? Maybe. Or is it kind of like a partnership, right? A product and UX, like we're kind of a partnership? I'd say that could be accurate. Are we a sidekick even, right? It's a product UX, and I would say all these are roughly true, right? I do feel like we play a integral part in product ownership. But of course, it is a team sport, and they say as a product leader, you're only as good as your team, and setting them up for success and giving them the space and air cover to do their best is ultimately how you and your product will be successful, right? And obviously, this is a team sport. And in fact, you see all this, not a Venn diagram, you see Venn diagrams like that quite often, but it's dev and PM and UX, like these are the legs of the stool, and if the leg is missing or not performing, performing well, you have trouble, right? You have problems here. So your UX team is, and I think I maybe kind of heard it, is one person you have loading you 20% of the time. You're here. You're not. You don't have the full stool. They're not embedded in your team. And so this is probably a good time to ask. So how many people have a UX designer kind of pegged to their team? Like how many people have access to UX designers? Like at least. Okay. And so that's fairly light, I would say. But so how many people would say that they have a UX team that's just top of their game, that they're just killing it? Like this is like rock star UX team. Okay, I'm getting hey, well, okay, right. Go on, okay. Sorry, where do you work again?
Digico.
Digico. Okay. Well, you have developers. You said you have UX designers as well. Then.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So what I mean by top of their game, I mean it's more than just visual design. That they're able to validate backlog items. That they know what your metrics are and know how to suggest ways to move them. And they can talk to the business team. They understand technology. They're leading customer insights. You have proper ratios, and that's actually a really big one right now. There's a number of studies from Forrester and others that talk about how many UX designers do you have per developers. The ratio is really supposed to be like 1 to 8, 1 to 12. Really, basically, you should have one UX designer per Scrum pod, whatever you want to call it. And that in most organizations is still quite out of whack. I always said, when you move from waterfall to agile, you don't need a ton of new people, right? Maybe you get a Scrum Master, maybe you retrain someone. But when you move to really, kind of double down on design thinking and customer experience and user experience, these are new people. These are people that probably don't exist in your organization. Like maybe you have some PAs that kind of always have that slant and want to convert. But so it's a more expensive proposition for companies, and therefore it takes more time to kind of coach them into moving in that direction. So I thought I'd talk about 3 of the many ways that you could use and utilize your UX team. I think 3 important ways around creating understanding, visualizing as much as possible, and validating your ideas. I'll stop there for a second. Are there any questions up to this point, or? An intimate group, so feel free to yell out. I won't offend me at all. All right, so creating understanding. So I have a number of quotes in here, and I guess the reason I'm using quotes is one, I'm going to post this deck, so I want you all to use these quotes and send them to your boss as well if you're looking to start or grow a UX team. But I want you to know it's not just me saying it's important, a lot of other folks are saying it's important as well. So Forbes did 13 jobs that now matter the most from a digital perspective, and user researcher is on that list. So user researchers are the eyes, ears, and conscious of the product manager. As the guy explains, user researchers provide the knowledge that ensures that you build products that delight your customers through a great user experience. So again, you should know your customers well, but if you have a UX team or a research team or a UX team, right, they can facilitate that for you and with you, right? So it takes a burden off you to own that piece of it. Learning everything about the customer becomes the most important focus of creating product strategy. When companies talk about the problems of the customer, they're saying, look at what you're dealing with, look at how we want to help, right? So you're showing empathy to the customers. This is Jared Spool. He's a well-known UX designer. He speaks quite often. But he talks about his exposure hours. It's one of those things that just makes sense. Teams that watch people use the products they're making do better. Like full stop, right? And he talks about a lot of organizations are tracking exposure hours now. When I was at Travelocity and we were moving to the product model, we started testing Thursdays. So every Thursday we would bring in travelers and we would find a different product team that wanted to validate an idea. So you're a product owner, you have an idea for a new way to search for hotels. Great. One of our UX designers will mock it up in our tool set. We got travelers coming in. We're going to validate it, right? We would do that every Thursday and start that cadence. This is Jake from Gartner. What's important to remember is that customer journeys aren't created, they're discovered, right? And so that's why a lot of people think they can brainstorm customer journeys, but again, a lot of times we're not those customers, or even if we are those customers, like maybe it's something consumer-oriented, we're not all the different persona types that are buying whatever it is that you're selling. So they are discovered, which is quite misunderstood. This is Firefox. We don't have any frameworks for understanding behavior outside of what we speculate about inside the building, right? There's a lot of get out of the building, go meet customers, go meet people using your product. Like you should be out and about often. Yes?
How are you using marketing analytics? I mean, that's what I'm kind of hearing, is it's kind of like
so your tools will tell you, so marketing analytics will tell you what's going on, but it doesn't really tell you the why behind it. It can't answer all the questions. Like I mentioned earlier, our product analytics are telling us this. We go out there and they're just not even using your product to do that job, but they're using someone else's product.
So you're doing test groups?
No. So we'll go out and through one-to-one observations. It can scale. So some of our larger projects we're flying all over the world. And so imagine working for a company that makes a product, it's a B2B product, so we're flying to their clients, which are usually fairly big names that we all know, and we're observing how their teams work. Maybe it's a bit like process engineering, but with a slightly different view. Like we're looking for how they feel about it. I mean, the process part of it's there, what they're doing, how they're working, how they want to work, how they want the process to work. But really, how do they feel about the product? Why aren't they doing certain things? So it's a wider view than just the literal process.
Yeah, I think for the UX, more is being expected from them. Like for example, for my UX team, I mean, they put a great demo for me and the business owners that I represent. But then I found out that from the delivery manager that I couldn't deploy the code because they forgot about the ADA, the American Disability Act. So, like some of these things that are coming out, especially for large scale products, they sometimes I feel like they're too concentrated on something to look pretty, that they forget how that will affect,
So I would argue that was a potentially immature user experience team,
exactly.
Right? So they're focusing in on maybe what looks cool. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. Maybe they're not even talking to the technology team about what can even be done, and they're overshooting what the technology team could ever deliver. They're not involving customer needs. They're not validating with customers. It's purely, the visuals, how cool it is. Like, it's just a cool new thing from Uber. They're pulling it in. Well, is that right for your audience? Like, I don't know. Like, what's the demographic that you're targeting, right? So, there's definitely a maturity scale for user experience teams. And a lot of that base is, it starts with visual design and kind of moves into a greater kind of understanding of business and customer. So investing in user research is just about the only way to consistently generate a rich stream of data about customers' needs and behaviors. It informs product managers, engineers, and just about everyone else. This is from Google Ventures, right? So Google talks about this quite often as well. Gallup they're talking about quantitative customer experience metrics aren't enough, and it talks about how qualitative is valuable. No customer experience technology platform by itself can provide deep insights into why customers do what they do. There's a lot of companies out there selling platforms, right, that they talk about it'll build your customer experience journey, but what it's really doing is seeing what they're currently doing today, and that is useful, but it's also useful to go back and see why are they doing these things. Like, we've had clients where maybe mobile, as an example, where the mobile conversion is not, more of their traffic is moving to mobile conversion is not matching desktop. Why? Like, where are they buying now? Like, what happened? Like the overall conversions. I mean, there are why questions that you could go out and let's sit with some of your shoppers and let's see what they're doing now. Like what is changing? Understanding the problem is harder and takes longer than designing the solution. It's a product director at Google. So what does understanding look like? I kind of already mentioned going out and observing people, and it's usually a one-on-one. We don't do a lot of focus groups because we think there's a lot of groupthink in there. We prefer to go out in people's environments, although we do situations where we pull people into our validation lab as well. And it's really I mentioned one of our lead researchers has an anthropology background. We have cognitive science, like all these interesting background psychology, so they know how to get information from people, right? They make them feel at ease, and they're asking them questions, but then they're also just observing as well. And the observations are really just important as what they're saying, because we all know that we're probably poor predictors of the future, and we're kind of aspirational, and usually what we're telling folks, especially in surveys. But it generates lots of data, and this is the part where I think a lot of people, that's really all we're doing is generating data. So this is a wall here, with kind of curved wall in the office, and there's probably, many hundreds of Post-it notes here. Each one of these has either an insight or an observation or a direct quote from a user. And so imagine bringing your business team in here. It would be bringing the business team in to help us sort this. You got 5 different people saying the same thing about some pain point they're having with your product, right? Like, that's really eye-opening, right? They're like, at the end of it, they're like, oh my gosh, I never knew that was a problem. Do you see that all 5 of them had the same problem, right? And that's throwing up insights and opportunities, and that's what we're going to start to validate. Or we're using that to validate. We could build later to validate, and that's helping build out the backlog, right? Journey maps, again, kind of showing, what is the journey, what are the different nuances in the different persona types, and then what are future solutions that you could use to entice people in each one of these. This was a client where really they're just kind of focused here in this one very specific area, and they wanted to open up the funnel. So they're like, all right, like, we know kind of what people do here, but what do people do, across that whole buying experience? And this was a case where it was a longer process, and so we had them do a diary study where they actually recorded the process. And we would go in their home and have them kind of replay that process to us. Personas, and these aren't creative writing exercises. These are actually based on observations and going out and interviewing people. Product opportunities, visualizing some of those product opportunities. code creation. So we'll have users come in our lab, we'll run them through prototypes, we'll run them through designs, we'll have them stand up and kind of write what they think on the board as well. And we actually have a book about this as well. If you go to experience.project202.com, it's a free book. But we wrote a book that talks about a lot of this process because a lot of people, and a lot of times will sell into CTOs and CIOs, they don't really understand the design process. It's still kind of mysterious to them. They think it's the cool designer and the sunglasses goes back in their room without the lights and they do some stuff and then they sprinkle some magic. And that's not at all what it's like. It is a process, just like Agile, just like anything else that you can follow and get good results from. And there's a great podcast called Dollars to Donuts as well, where they actually go and interview user researchers at really big organizations and talk about how that works within their organization. And you know, on the qualitative, quantitative side, so we do a little more on the qualitative side, but you know, a lot of organizations are really more focused on the quantitative, and maybe they do usability testing, but a lot of organizations don't even do that. And our argument is, if you're only doing that, you're only really getting half the picture of your customer that you could be getting. You know, observing users in person provides you with data that surveys and behavioral data simply can't. That's one of the lead researchers from Airbnb. Forrester has actually a whole report on building real customer understanding and talking about when they survey people, most people are doing surveys, but that's not actually where you get the rich data from. You get a better view of your customer and their needs if you use more modern things like ethnographic field studies and contextual inquiries and diary studies. And again, it's not to do research for the sake of research, and we're not giving anyone a 100-page Word document, right? It's the idea is we try to make it really actionable, really visual. Hopefully these are things that your designers, because they do have visual design backgrounds, and that's why we pair researchers and designers together often. Well, they'll come back with like, this is what's going on in your customer's world, right? And the whole team can kind of rally around it and understand the direction that they're going in. And so it's really mapping tasks and emotions to discover the deep customer and user insights via observational methods, and then prioritizing those insights and experience enhancements and iterating through design, and then delivering the right technology solutions fast with the focus on improving that business. And that's kind of the goal at the end of all this. So visualizing as much as possible. So designers like Post-it notes. If you have designers, you probably have Post-it notes all over the place. Probably a large bill attached to it as well. No matter where the Post-it notes go, we love Post-it notes. So you'll see us sticking things, and that's because we're visual and spatial thinkers, and we want to bring everyone around to kind of collaborate with them. And when you put things on the walls, people naturally stop and look and stare and ask questions, right? This is really what we want. We like to sketch, and so again here we're sketching some potential opportunities, and this is on a whiteboard. So you know, from user insights, this is a problem, how could that problem be solved? And you start sketching that out. In different ways on whiteboards. We like to sort things, collect things. You know, I mentioned taking all that data and collecting them up into pain points and opportunities and insights. Again, on Post-it notes, more Post-it notes. This is, actually I'm not sure, yeah, I think these are some of the stories, and then we have the business team kind of taking some notes and posting around the stories. But yeah, we like to visualize, so we're sketching as well. So we're wireframing, we're creating quick, you know, if we're in a meeting, if you're in a meeting with a UX designer and a question comes up about a UI widget, they should stand up immediately and go to the whiteboard and sketch it out. They should be the ones that are up facilitating, drawing things. They should be the ones really moving things forward by showing visuals. So again, sketching. And there's a couple books on this. Game Storming is a good one by David Gray, and he talks about how, you know, like what kind of result you want and different kind of visual ways of solving that in group settings. Back of the napkin, Dan Rome, kind of a classic around, you know, what, you know, if you want to, you know, who, how, where, when, and like different ways of charting that and visualizing it. In fact, I don't know if you saw recently, Google has a new auto draw. Have you guys played with this yet? So even if you can't draw, which I'd argue everyone can draw, because even a stick figure tells a story. This is a new tool from Google where it tries to guess through AI what you're drawing. So then you could just select it, and then it just converts it for you. So a little new, right? This is something they just came out with, but imagine these getting integrated with these, you know, smart whiteboards that we have right here, to where you start to draw something, and then you can just pick from a list, and boom, there it goes, right? You're gonna see this next one's a very poor attempt at drawing. I thought it was going to be a camel, and then at the end I made it into a horse because I forgot to put the hump in there. So this is meant to be. So I'm actually not that good of a visual designer, especially when I'm using fine artist, especially when I'm using my trackpad. So this is I don't know what that is. Google knew right away. It's either a wiener dog or a horse. Boom, there we go. All right. One exercise actually we do quite often is called hats. And so when we're in a business meeting, we'll actually have everyone draw a different hat. So so we sit down with everyone, give them all a big sticky note, and say, I just want everyone to do 5 minutes, just draw a hat. You you put the hats on the board and you have everyone kind of explain or have introduce themselves. I'm Jeremy. Oh, I drew a baseball hat because I'm really into baseball. But just by saying the word hat, right, it illustrates that everyone had something totally different in their head when that word was said, right? And as designers, we have the opportunity to help you visualize a lot of that so everyone can come together and really have an understanding. That's where prototypes and designs really help, right? So you could brainstorm about the best way to go through a checkout path for months and months, or a designer could take a stab at it, make a prototype and show it to the team and really show what everyone's talking about. And we do translate requirements into experiences. Of course, we're going into Sketch has been a popular tool set recently, or going into Photoshop and using design systems and kind of mocking up kind of those final designs. But this is all after a lot of prototyping, a lot of that iterative design when you're doing these final designs. Although the tools are making it way easier to make things that look very final a lot faster. And then validating ideas. So developing a product without user research is essentially one expensive experiment. I love that. So again, that 2-year project where they didn't talk to customers once, that happens all the time, right? It's such an expensive experiment. So this is Laura has a new book coming out. I'm hoping very much to see more validation of ideas. Let's just stop shipping features, crossing our fingers, and hoping they work. I'm friends with a couple of developers, and they talk about how their product team owns the backlog. They're putting in new features in the product. As developers, they want to make changes. I mean, they want to do something meaningful in the product, and the new feature launches, and nothing happens. Right, the metric didn't go up. Like there was no real change, and so they feel kind of disheartened that I want something that actually affects the customers, and so it's you need to stop crossing your fingers, find out if it's something the customers want and they would use. This is Marty Kagan. Again, I pretty much love everything he says. Remember that the higher order objective is to validate our ideas the fastest, cheapest way possible. Actually building and launching a product idea is generally the slowest, most expensive way to validate an idea, right? There's sayings like the 1, 10, 100. So from every dollar invested in UX, you save 10 in fixing issues during development, and 100 if the product has been released. I don't know if those numbers are actually true, but I mean, think about it. As a designer, I can go change my sketch file quickly. As a developer, if I launch something in production, I have to go change it. Obviously, it's going to take more time and effort, right? And there's 600 billion spent on digital projects, and when you look at why, 30% is wasted due to poor requirements definition, right? 67% of projects are scrapped for being underwhelming. Again, that 2-year project that they never showed it to a customer. Or up to 50% developer time is spent on avoidable rework. Imagine when you're sitting in when you're sitting there watching what the developers have built, and you're making changes there, all that could have been done earlier and upfront with the design team. There's lots of books about this, and it kind of molds different things. So Lean Startup, Design Sprints, Lean UX, Inspired, and they all talk about that kind of iterative test early and often. Now, a lot of these are built more for startups, and so startups get a certain amount of capital, and they're just going to go all in. Although we actually do work with startups, and we have done some of these methods with startups as well, but more often than not, it's a passion project, and they're going to launch it hell or high water, and if there's a market there or not, they don't really care, right? Or they just hope there is. But these are methods that you can use even in your enterprise setting. You're not building to build, you're building to answer. The prototype is throwaway after a sprint 99% of the time. Now, I don't know if I agree that the prototype is thrown away, because a lot of times we'll prototype, and then we'll make improvements on that prototype, and eventually actually that makes it into the backlog at some point. The developers have that definition, right? And not only do they have a screen, but a full prototype that they could run through. And again, I mentioned the validation lab of running things through often, and a lot of people call it usability testing, but usability testing historically was the testing at the end of the process. So I just spent a year building something, now let's see if anyone likes it or not, right? Obviously the wrong thing to do. Where iterative validation is where, we can do non-functional prototypes really quickly and run those through the lab. This is one of our product owners at Travelocity at the time, and even though we had testing Thursday, he wanted an idea. He wanted to try out an idea. So it was an iPad app design that we were testing out, and so he went to Starbucks, offered a free gnome to anyone who would sit down and test his product, and this is the manager of Starbucks. He was happy to have him there and happy to get a gnome, but it doesn't have to be, right? More organizations are having usability labs, more organizations are having user research teams, but there's still guerrilla ways of getting out there and understanding customer needs. So these are some prototypes. These aren't ours. There's tons of these galleries out there that have all these prototypes of new UI ideas. But this is using InVision to model some of these, and this is what we use as well. So a lot of times when customers come in, we're giving them something that looks very real, but this is all fake, this is all through design. And so we would say, yeah, hey, on this page here, where would you go to find this thing, right? And then making sure we're not asking a leading question, see if they can figure it out. Like, what do you expect to happen, right? What do you think about that interaction? How did that work for you? And so you could do this all early, and you could actually make changes, sometimes even in between sessions if it's a small change, or again in between days, depending on how big the change is. Apps like Envision are being used by small and big companies alike. There's other ways to prioritize things and validate this. We validate ideas sometimes. So this is a Kano method that we use quite often, and it's where you show a new feature idea, and you gauge how excited they'll be with the feature, but how dissatisfied they would be without the feature. This is a great way to really understand where some of the key things are that you need to make sure that are in there, because mostly customers are like, that's great, because it's free to them. We all know it's not free, right? And so this really helps validate some of those backlog items. You're going to come out with design principles and opportunities, and like there's lots of ways of validating not only products and usability, but ideas as well. So I'm almost done. I just want to talk about hiring designers, since it sounds like some of your team, or maybe some of you are starting to ramp up UX teams, or maybe you have questions about UX teams, and I do know, just because I've been here in Dallas in UX for some time, the number of UX designers now is quite amazing. Like, I remember when we could all fit in this room easily. Now, there's Brian Sullivan out of Sabre has a conference that has 500 to 1,000 people every year, and there's more and more people every year here. There's a couple things. We talked about high-performing UX teams. Again, these are all the types of things you want someone to do. These are the things that you really should be looking for. So if you were validating UX designers, and I know, it's funny, because I know like a UX designer might be pegged to the IT team, so maybe you got the chance to interview them, or maybe you did get the chance to interview them. Sometimes they're a product, sometimes you have a proper user experience organization, so it's all over the place, right? But hopefully at some point as a product owner, you get to meet a couple of those. So do they look the part? That's kind of a misnomer. So yes, designers sometimes like to dress a little sharper than your normal person, but because design is kind of a new thing, UX is a new thing, we have people from wide varied backgrounds. We have one of our lead front-end developers actually was a rock star and traveled around playing in a band that had a billboard hit. We have people who are, I knew a UX designer that had a background in ballet dancing, right? So it's like, designers, because it's still like hardly today there's a program that fits exactly what we do. We come from all different types of backgrounds. Do they have a portfolio? So visual portfolios are obviously important because we're communicating visually, so you have to make sure someone understands the visual medium. But what's really changing is you really want to make sure that you check their work. So in the old days, you would just see the screen, and you would be like, this is the thing that I produced. But now, a really more mature organization is looking for why, right? What was the why behind that? Like, did you do customer interviews, for that? Or why did you make these decisions? And what was that process? And when you validated this with customers, what happened, right? What was the business need? What metrics were you trying to change? What metrics did change after this launch, right? So these are the questions, it's the math teacher. Yeah, show your work. Now, you can't just show the page. When I worked for Travelocity, I remember it's like half the UX designers that would send a resume over had the Travelocity homepage on their portfolio, because they made maybe a button or an icon on it or something. And I'm like, I know all of you didn't make that homepage. I know the person who made the homepage. So you really got to check their work and see how they think through things. The Envision blog recently had a product manager's guide to working with visual designers. It's actually a pretty good primer of how to get a little more of a visual eye to things. And because this is a problem sometimes where, like as a product team, and if you're not a designer, don't have an eye for design, you don't know what you're looking for, right? Like how do you even know what's good or what's bad, right? And not only that, but a lot of designers, there's actually a lot of material out there, and it's actually easy for some designers to actually grab something and just make some slight tweaks. So really making sure it's their work. You have to work for big companies. This is one where you should just, like certain companies, so like when I worked for Sabre the first time, I was in a very small UX team. In fact, it was the first UX team that Sabre had at the time. I was working with, and we grew to like 4-ish people, and then a couple of people left to go to a startup, and the team dwindled. I was like the last man standing, right? What's weird is when you're a single UX designer or a very small team in a large company, it's hard to have an effect on anything. Like you're jumping around, you're going to meetings, and so I basically decided my job is actually to build the UX UX team. Like that's now my job. Like my job is to always say I'm going to help people if they have questions or they need help. But like I'm one guy, you have like 15 products. Like what am I doing, right? And so when I left, I had built a team. You were 7 people at the time. So it was a growing team. And after I left, it continued to grow. But so I mean, you could hire a designer who worked for some really big brands, and if they were the only UX designer, kind of off in this kind of ether, like sometimes they weren't actually doing a lot of work, right? And my argument would be, if they're really passionate about it, if they could really evangelize and sell, the team would have grown over time, right? And they would have had more work there. So, I mean, you need to ask questions like, do they understand the purpose of design? Can they articulate the process and what they're doing? Can they lead? Can they direct? Can they collaborate? I didn't mention, but I do feel like designers are kind of natural collaborators, right? And we're in a meeting, we should be the ones getting up, sketching things, putting post-it notes. Like, I hear a bunch of ideas here, let's visualize those ideas. Okay, everyone write down their idea on a post-it note, let's affinitize them, right? Like, the designers should be doing that type of work. And just are they passionate? Like, not that, I mean, I agree, everyone should be passionate, but design's kind of a new thing, and you have to keep up with it. There's new methodologies, new tool sets coming out all the time, and so you gotta really be passionate about design. When we run, and so we run design tests just as you would through developers. And so what we do is we actually hand a candidate a set of research. So we're not making them do the research part of it because obviously it has to be condensed. So here's some research. First we give them some options. There's 4 different options of different products they could design. Then we give them all the research needed for that product, and then we leave the room for 30 minutes, and then we come back. And when we come back on the whiteboard, they need to sketch out the experience for that product, why they did everything, and then they need to articulate it back to the team. Like that's how we interview designers. And again, you're gauging a number of things there. 1, can you think on your feet? 2, can you sketch something decent? 3, can you present? Obviously, we're a consulting company, so that's maybe more important, although I would argue in a big company, you're evangelizing what you do quite often. Again, UX is still relatively new for a lot of organizations. Create understanding, visualize as much as possible, validate your ideas. Those are 3 things that designers could do well, and you should be utilizing them for. There's a couple of new books coming out. One's called Build Better Products, and then another one's called Product Leadership. And I like these because they're kind of product management books, but they're really they really talk about user experience, and they talk about understanding customer needs, which is something that I'm passionate about. They're kind of blending those 2 things. And then also, if you haven't heard of Mind the Product, it's a conference they have in San Francisco and London every year, and it's just a great conference, all about product management. They post some great articles on here. Again, it really does a good job of blending product management and design, user experience, customer experience, kind of all together. And yeah, that's the end of the presentation. So again, I post all my decks and everything on my website, and I'll post this one as well. And I have lots of other UX type decks on there. Yeah, I'd love to take some questions.